If you're like me, you've been deep down the rabbit holes of the food production industries in the United States, or if you don't live in the US, in your particular country of origin. And by going down this rabbit hole and seeing the practices that are used in conventional agriculture, you probably made the decision, like I did at some point, to never eat that sort of food again and to only get organic produce and organic animal products. Unfortunately, as this information about conventional agriculture and the pesticides that are used and the factory farm system that's in place for animal production, that information is likewise seen by PR marketing strategists at the huge multinational food corporations. And they can see many years in advance, because these are very intelligent people that are making a living at manipulating you. And so they know that this is going to be a trend in the future. And so their corporations positioned themselves for this change, and they began developing their own organic programs, seeing that it would be big business for them because, of course, they could charge a premium for the products that they sell with the organic label. But like all shareholder beholden corporations that came before them in other industries, their only obligation is to increase profits continually to satisfy the shareholders who buy the shares in the company. Accordingly, they have an incentive to cut corners and decrease costs at every nexus point of the supply chain. And as a result, or as a byproduct of this, these huge multinational food corporations have inserted themselves into the USDA certification process, and the NOP that was originally provided by the first regulations passed by Congress. And so you'll see a lot of these connected individuals on the actual board that is voting on all of the proposals as to what is organic and what is not considered organic as far as the USDA organic label goes. And over time, the status of the label has become less and less meaningful as more and more exceptions and exemptions are legislated into what is considered USDA organic. Unlike a lot of discussion that you will see about this topic on the internet, I have actually worked on an organic certified farm. So I have direct experience with what I'll be discussing here. And there's a funny story along those lines. I remember when I first started, and we were just sitting around at the end of the day, just resting after a long, hard day of work. And I remember there was a bunch of white butterflies flying around, and the sun was setting, and I made a comment to one of the guys next to me, like, "Oh man, look at all those beautiful butterflies. What a scene." And he turns to me and he goes, "Steve, those butterflies are laying the eggs for the worms to eat those plants." And I just started laughing. I was like, "Oh man, really?" And yeah, what I didn't know at the time was that those butterflies that were flying around were actually laying the eggs for the worms that destroy brassica plants. It just so happened that we were staring at some broccoli plants that were right in front of us. And so you come to find out that even on organic farms, they have the ability, depending on what type of operation they want to run, to spray pesticides onto crops. Now, of course, the actual pesticides or fungicides that are used are within the USDA program as acceptable, And so they're not as offensive as some of the traditional pesticides that you would find being used as derivatives of something Monsanto might produce, Roundup, for example. For instance, there is the quote unquote pesticide known as pyganic, and this is derived from a chrysanthemum flower, and it is toxic to certain insects. But the problem is that while it will kill some insects due to the reaction in their stomachs when they consume this derivative of the chrysanthemum flower, which is poison to them, it also will kill beneficial insects like ladybugs. So, for example, you can spray pyganic to try and get rid of aphids, but the pyganic will also kill the ladybugs, and the ladybugs actually eat aphids. And aphids are just little tiny bugs that infest certain crops like lettuces, or sometimes you can find them on kale. Really, you can find them anywhere, just depending on what's going on your farm. But so it's a delicate balance either way, no matter what you're doing. So ideally, you're not going to spray any pesticides, but that's just not a reality on most farms. You could go to extremes and invest in a very extensive covering system where you would actually cover your crops with loose fabric, and that might decrease the amount of insects that are trying to kill your crops. But that's a very labor intensive and expensive way to go about it. I mean, it's not like the pesticides are actually cheap. I mean, pyganic is really expensive per ounce. But anyway, the good news, this is a great little phrase here. The good news, organic produce is now certified by the government, widely available at big box stores, and more affordable than ever. The bad news, see above. That's a great, that that might be the best little sentence that I've ever seen constructed. Oh, that's good. Right, and this actually looks like this kind of looks like a Walmart. And that kind of tells you everything you need to know, right? Even Walmart has its own certified organic sections now. By all appearances, Cathy Evans would seem the ideal organic farmer. The fourth generation proprietor of Evans Knob Farm in Brewston Mills, West Virginia, she has never used chemical pesticides or growth hormones. Her poultry, 45 laying hens, 250 broiler chickens, 50 turkeys, and 22 ducks, is free range. Her Romney and Hampshire sheep grass fed. Evans also shears, cards, spins, and dyes fiber produced by those sheep, as well as that from her alpaca and llama. The resulting mountain of manure enriches vegetable plots where the 53-year-old grows everything from potatoes and peppers to squash and salad greens. Yet not a single cage-free egg or toma verde tomatillo that emerges from Evans' 130 acres sports a USDA organic label. This wasn't always the case. In 2003, when the United States Department of Agriculture first bestowed organic certification on Evans' operation, which supplies farmers markets and a CSA, the annual processing fees totaled $200. By the time she opted out in 2013, they had risen 350% to $900. Though diversification is an important aspect of sustainable agriculture, the government rewards the practice with a separate form for each crop and animal, burying Evans Knob Farm and others like it in an avalanche of paperwork. For Evans, the inspections began to take on a big brother quality, but the final straw came when she learned that eggs can be, in her words, considered organic if the chickens are fed organic grain and are cage-free, but they can be confined to a building, and the USDA doesn't say how long they have to be outside. Now, granted, this is from 2015. Keep that in mind. But we'll get further into more recent developments as we go. The more Evans learned, the more dissatisfied she became. It felt like the Department of Agriculture was creating loopholes for big agribusiness. Well, shocker. Of course that's what they're doing. Yeah, I mean, you can see how the huge industrial animal farms, especially the factory farms, well, you can see how those huge corporations would see the opportunity and the premium in the USDA organic market, and how they would invest in their own operations that would very closely mimic in scale their current factory farm operations, but they would just modify their practices to a certain extent so that it would qualify into the USDA program, but then they would cut every corner imaginable to cut their costs and then make a huge premium on those quote unquote organic products. And then you, the consumer, who is just looking to be healthy and not poison themselves or their family, you see that label and you think that it's better for you than the alternative, when in reality, almost nothing has changed other than the actual feed that they're giving the animals, which, okay, that's actually a benefit. Hey, we're not going to give this toxic feed to the animals. Well, that's good. All right. But then nothing else changes as far as what the organic program is supposed to represent, which would be animals freely going about their business without any confinement whatsoever, other than just, certain accommodations for them at night. More than one way to certify an animal. In order for livestock and poultry to be certified organic by the USDA, it must meet 3 criteria. No hormones, antibiotics, or non-organic food may be used. Ruminants must have access to pasture throughout the grazing season, and birds cannot be confined to cages and must have access to the outdoors. But animal farmers can qualify for a number of other USDA regulated labels. So then you'll see these that are on all of the egg packages. You have cage-free, free-range, and then the biggest scam of all is natural, of course. You'll see all natural on all sorts of boxes, which is just a total marketing ploy and means nothing. And then no hormones added. Cathy Evans is far from alone. A number of independent farmers have grown disillusioned since Congress passed the Organic Foods Production Act in 1990, establishing a uniform national standard for organic crops, livestock, processed products, and wild harvested plants to be enforced by the USDA. Farmers must wait 3 years after first adopting organic techniques to become certified. As is often the case when good intentions become codified on a large scale, the tax code, for instance, the letter of the law tends to trump its spirit, which is how, in this case, some foods containing synthetic preservatives are nonetheless certified organic. Then there's the matter of where all that organic food at Costco, Walmart, and Target comes from. Though domestic sales rose from $3.6 billion in 1997 to nearly $40 billion last year, and this is 2015, it's actually up to $50 billion now. $10 billion in 3 years. That shows you how rapidly this is growing, right? As more and more and more people understand what's going on with the food system, it's only going to continue to grow as well. And so there's a massive incentive, like I said, for all of these huge corporations to co-opt this movement. And just in general, like the whole organic, sustainable agriculture movement is premised on the idea that your actual farm itself is sustainable. It's not some huge monocrop field like these huge food companies are producing produce from. No, you're supposed to have a small, sustainable rotation of crops where it's not the same crop in the same area year after year after year after year. You're supposed to let some of your land rest and grow some cover crop on it to replenish the nutrients and not wear out the soil. It's a whole process that the label was originally designed to represent, and we're very far from that process now because it's just the reality of the situation that a lot of the organic produce being provided to these stores is on the same scale as their conventional produce is, so they mimic the supply chain. And there's all sorts of other problems that we'll get to soon. But continuing on here, though domestic sales rose from $3.6 billion in 1997 to nearly $40 billion last year, the acreage of certified domestic farmland has barely budged. A full 13% of the organic products sold in this country are imported. The broader availability and gradually decreasing cost of organic food certainly benefits consumers. as does third-party certification that protects against cynical marketers who abuse terms like natural. But the truth is, few consumers understand what the certified organic label actually means. Not only can organic produce be grown abroad, but it can also be treated with any number of synthetic substances, including a man-made form of copper sulfate used for fungal infections that's known to be highly toxic to humans, fish, and insects. And on this point, there's more evidence that organic label is meaningless. This is a big problem that's recently come to the public's attention. A year-long audit by the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Inspector General's office found weaknesses in the oversight of imported organic produce, according to a report released this week. In other words, consumers who make a point of buying organic food may be getting ripped off. One major issue the audit uncovered was that imported organics, which consumers believe to be free of chemicals, could actually be treated with regular pesticides at the port of entry. So remember, in 2015, it was 13% of the organic products that were being imported, and it's probably a little more now. So maybe it's close to like 20% now. And 20% of those products, imported agricultural products, whether organic or conventional, are sometimes fumigated at U.S. ports of entry to prevent prohibited pests from entering the United States. Since there are no special treatment methods for organic products, the report noted, the same substances used to get rid of pests on conventionally grown food are used on the organic foods. And there are no controls to ensure these products are no longer sold or labeled as organic. So how wonderful, right? If you buy an imported vegetable that was fumigated at the border without your knowledge and contains this conventional pesticide, you have no clue. And worse, on top of that, you're buying what you think is an organic vegetable, and it's at a premium from the conventional product. And you're getting the same level of pesticides, probably even worse because it's actually right on the skin, you know? So obviously it goes without saying to thoroughly wash everything, especially vegetables, before you consume them. The director of the National Organic Program, the small arm of the USDA charged with ensuring that all products bearing the agency's organic seal actually meet its standards, announced his resignation on September 10th, days before the audit was released. Miles McAvoy, the USDA Deputy Administrator who had run the NOP since 2009, has had a long career in organic agriculture, including a stint as the first organic inspector for the Washington State Department of Agriculture, according to his bio on the USDA's website. When the USDA developed the rules for certification, it built in a sunset clause as a way to help the food industry transition to organics. The measure stipulated that the right to use each of the 126 accepted synthetic substances would automatically expire in 5 years unless the National Organic Standards Board, an external advisory group, voted by a 2/3 majority to keep it. Recently, however, the rules have changed. Now, instead of each substance expiring automatically, a strategy intended to spur innovation of organic methods, the NOSB is required to remove it with a 2/3 majority vote. The board's members are appointed by the USDA, an arrangement that many say leaves the NSOB open to political and corporate influence. I felt like I just cursed when I said that, the NSOB. Oh, that's because I said it wrong, the NOSB. Though 4 of the board's 15 positions are designated for farmers, 2 of the current farmer appointees are employed by large agribusinesses and do not actually make their living as organic farmers. Oh, and we'll get into that further when we actually look at the board currently and former members. Mark Castell, a co-founder of the Cornucopia Institute, a Wisconsin-based watchdog group, points to the sunset clause change as an example of corporate interest diluting organic standards. Castell asserts that the USDA has looked the other way when it comes to what he calls fraudulent practices in the organic livestock industry, because the companies in question have political sway at the USDA and NOSB. Last summer, Castell's organization hired an aerial photography crew to record the activity at 14 certified organic dairy and cattle farms. Despite the law stipulating that ruminants have access to pasture, Cornucopia's photographers captured a number of farms where no cows could be seen outdoors over a several-month period. We asked the certifiers, and they said all those farms were in good standing, says Castle. The USDA dismissed the issue without even investigating. And there you go. I mean, that just sums everything up, right? And of course, all of these huge operations that are run by multinational food corporations who are behind these same conventional practices and products that are poisoning everyone, they just say, oh, well, yeah, these are just taken at various points in the day. They don't see 24/7 what's going on in our farms where our animals are getting plenty of access to the pastures. Of course, that's what they say, right? So we can see what's going on here. Organic food fraud leads Congress to weigh bill doubling USDA oversight. Amid growing tumult over whether the USDA organic label really guarantees that a product is grown as advertised, Congress is weighing legislation that would roughly double the budget for the USDA's oversight of the organic industry. The USDA's National Organic Program is supposed to protect consumers from food that is advertised as organic, but that does not meet organic standards. That's just a weird sentence. This year, the Post has published several stories casting doubt on the authenticity of the products from some of the largest quote-unquote organic producers of milk, eggs, and imported grains. There's a growing concern about the capacity of the Agricultural Department to accurately monitor products that are labeled organic but may not actually be. Faso said, citing the shipments of bogus organic soybeans from the Ukraine through Turkey to the United States, which was reported in the Post in May. Oh yeah, that was a good one. And you know what's so ironic about this article and the fact that the Washington Post is actually doing research into this is that Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post, and he also recently bought, through Amazon's acquisition of Whole Foods, the Whole Foods market chain. And you'll be able to see Whole Foods deterioration happen in real time after that purchase from Amazon or by Amazon. And you can see why Amazon made that purchase. I mean, Whole Foods have been declining for years. They were, a few years ago when, I think it was Washington, when they had the GMO labeling initiative on their ballot, Whole Foods actually gave money to fight the ballot, to defeat it. Okay, so like they've been going downhill for years. They, they're a far cry from what they started out as. And it just now culminated in them allowing the purchase by Amazon, who, they can see what's going on. 10 years from now, Amazon will probably be delivering organic produce right to your door from a drone delivery, right? I mean, that's where it's headed. So they're going to try to take over the organic food industry like they've taken over everything else. I mean, you can easily see that's what they're up to. The label said organic, but these massive imports of corn and soybeans weren't. A shipment of 36 million pounds of soybeans sailed late last year from Ukraine to Turkey to California. Along the way, it underwent a remarkable transformation. The cargo began as ordinary soybeans. Like ordinary soybeans, they were fumigated with a pesticide. They were priced like ordinary soybeans too. But by the time the 600-foot cargo ship carrying them to Stockton, California arrived in December, the soybeans had been labeled organic according to receipts, invoices, and other shipping records. That switch, the addition of the USDA organic designation, boosted their value by approximately $4 million, creating a windfall for at least one company in the supply chain. And I have to say, this is actually an area in supply chain management where the blockchain could actually be beneficial, because if it's immutably put on the blockchain ledger, an entire supply chain, this sort of fraud would not be possible. So, say what you want about the fraudulent nature of the creation of Bitcoin and all of the ICOs that that came off the Ethereum platform that are total scams. Irrespective of all that, you still have players like JP Morgan developing their own blockchain. So just a little aside that in the supply chain area, this could actually be beneficial. Which is not to say that any of the supply chain ICOs are actually legitimate. Those are most likely scams too. That switch, the addition of the USDA organic designation, boosted their value by approximately $4 million, creating a windfall for at least one company in the supply chain. So there you go. That really underscores everything that we're talking about here. There is such a premium that can be taken advantage of through the USDA organic label because, you see, the premium is supposed to reflect the fact that it's actually much more difficult to produce small-scale organic produce and organic livestock-derived products than it is to implement all of the modernization techniques used by all of the conventional agricultural farms and the companies that run those farms, or even just the regular, family farmers who have been convinced to adopt all of those practices. It's much easier to produce much more using the whole pesticide system in a monocrop field environment where everything's harvested by machines. Well, when you're doing a small scale operation where you have to harvest things by hand and you're not using some of the artificial fertilizers and pesticides, well, it's much more difficult and labor intensive. So the premium is supposed to reflect that fact. You're paying the farmer to make it worth that amount of effort for them to produce the food. They can't charge the prices that a regular huge farm can charge and survive. This is where the premium is supposed to come from. And so you can see how all of these people would be interested in taking advantage of that premium for themselves, but not doing any of the work that's supposed to go into it. Moving on, here's another recent problem, and this is from the Cornucopia Institute. USDA accused of disseminating corporate propaganda backing agribusiness switch of organics to soilless hydroponic production. Freedom of Information Act documents, witnesses indicate collusion, USDA organic program in turmoil. Formal complaint filed with Office of Inspector General. In an affront to the farming pioneers who launched the organic movement, today a $50 billion industry, the USDA announced late last month that the certification of hydroponic, aquaponic, and aeroponic operations is allowed under the USDA organic regulations and has been since the National Organic Program began. Much of the hydroponic production entering the organic market takes place in large industrial scale greenhouses using liquid fertilizers, mostly produced from conventional hydrolyzed soybeans. Wonderful, right? Hydroponic produce, and of course soybeans, are almost entirely genetically modified at this stage. So you're getting hydrolyzed synthetic soybeans, synthetic in the sense of the fact that they're genetically modified and then sprayed with all of the pesticides that are designed for genetically modified crops, including glyphosate, Roundup. And this is the food, as it were, for these hydroponic vegetables that are then labeled as USDA organic. So yeah, that's going on. Hydroponic produce under the organic label is rapidly displacing fruit and vegetables grown in soil, which is carefully nurtured to improve fertility by diversified farms. The founders within the organic farming community contend that hydroponics' cheaper production techniques employed by huge growers in Mexico, Canada, and Europe, where hydroponics cannot be legally labeled as organic, is crushing legitimate soil-based farmers in the U.S. There is no legal requirement for conventional or organic produce to be labeled as grown hydroponically, so consumers are likely unaware that the production methods and corresponding nutrient levels used in the fruits and vegetables they are purchasing have radically changed. The USDA statement was made regardless of the fact that the National Organic Standards Board, the governing body that the USDA Secretary is required by Congress to consult on all organic rulemaking, has never voted to legalize soilless production. The present federal organic regulations and their enabling legislation, the Organic Foods Production Act, both require careful stewardship of soil fertility as a prerequisite for organic certification. Despite the USDA's claim that hydroponics has always been approved as part of organics, the Cornucopia Institute has obtained numerous internal and external emails exchanged between NOP staff and certifiers expressing their understanding that soil-based production is required. These documents were procured through a Freedom of Information Act request and are dated as recently as 2016. The NOP has unilaterally and in secret allowed for the certification of soilless systems without standards, public notice, or opportunity for public comments. And yeah, I mean, you go to the grocery store, especially if you live in a climate that experiences winter, you go to the grocery store, even if it's a health food store, and you see things like bell peppers or various fruits that are totally out of season, and you ask yourself, well, how are these being produced? Well, of course, some of them are being produced in more temperate climates like Southern California and Mexico. But a lot of them are produced hydroponically, and as this article is going over here, this does not have to be disclosed on any of the labeling, and in fact, they can be labeled as certified organic. And then on top of that, some of those products are being sprayed at the border with conventional pesticides in addition. So the whole thing is just getting out of control. And it's on us to educate ourselves as to what is going on here so that we can make smart choices and not reward this behavior that is taking place. And if all of us do that, then these people will be put out of business. You know, obviously, it would be ideal if you got all of your produce from a local farm near you, but I understand the reality of the situation. You know, I work on a produce farm, and even I go to the grocery store and buy certain things, right? Because we just don't produce everything that I want to use. So it's just the way it is in our current society, you know. So this is the Omri Products list. And as you can see here, there is a huge, huge list of Omni-approved substances, fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides that are USDA organic compliant. And the first thing I want to go over along these lines is Bt is a live microorganism that kills certain insects and is used to kill unwanted insects in forests, agriculture, and urban areas. Now, on farms, Bt is used to treat the worm infestations that I was talking about earlier that the brassicas are very susceptible to. So we're talking broccoli, kale, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, colettes, collards. I mean, sometimes they even get on carrot greens and eat carrot greens. Like they're everywhere. And so Bt is sprayed on these crops and it kills the worms. In addition to the actual butterflies that lay the eggs. In a purified form, some of the proteins produced by Bt are acutely toxic to mammals. However, in their natural form, acute toxicity of commonly used Bt varieties is limited to caterpillars, mosquito larvae, and beetle larvae. Bt is closely related to, oh yeah, the beetles, dude. Yes, the beetles are a problem too. The beetles destroy a lot of stuff like, they'll destroy okra, they'll destroy beet greens. Yeah, beetles are a big problem too. Bt is closely related to a bacteria that causes food poisoning and to B. anthracus, the agent of the disease anthrax. So yes, Bt is closely related to anthrax. Few studies have been conducted on the chronic health effects, carcinogenicity, or mutagenicity of Bt. People exposed to Bt have complained of respiratory, eye, and skin irritation, and one corneal ulcer has occurred after direct contact with a Bt formulation. People also suffer from allergies to the inert secret ingredients. Yes, that's a big problem with all of these USDA organic certified pesticides, right? There's a lot of inert ingredients, quote unquote, that aren't listed on the actual package. People with compromised immune systems may be particularly susceptible to Bt. Viable Bt spores are known to exist for up to 1 year following application. Insect resistance to Bt has been well documented. Genetic engineering may greatly expand use of Bt, speeding up the development of more resistance. Large-scale applications of Bt can have far-reaching ecological impacts. BT can reduce dramatically the number and variety of moth and butterfly species, well, yeah, because they kill them, which in turn impacts birds and mammals that feed on caterpillars. In addition, a number of beneficial insects are adversely impacted by BT. BT is less toxic to mammals and shows fewer environmental effects than many synthetic insecticides. However, this is no reason to use it indiscriminately. Its environmental and health effects, as well as those of all other alternatives, must be thoroughly considered before use. BT should be used only when necessary and in the smallest quantities possible. It should always be used as a part of a sustainable management program. And if you think the huge agricultural monocrop operations are using it in a sustainable, small way, you're out of your mind. As hazards of conventional broad-acting pesticides are documented, researchers look for pesticides that are toxic only to the target pest, have less impact on other species, and have fewer environmental hazards. BT insecticides result from this research. However, there is evidence suggesting that BT is not as benign as the manufacturers would like us to believe, and that care is warranted in its use. BT is a species of bacteria that has insecticidal properties, affecting a selective range of insect orders. There are at least 34 subspecies of BT, and probably over 800 strain isolates. BT was first isolated in 1901 in Japan from diseased silkworm larvae. It was later isolated from Mediterranean flower moths and named Bacillus thuringiensis in 1911. It was not until 1958 that BT was used commercially in the United States. By 1989, BT products had captured 90 to 95% of the biopesticide market. So it's everywhere. BT products are used to control moth pests in fruits, vegetables, and beehives. I didn't know it was used in beehives. After the insect ingests BT, the crystal is dissolved in the insect's alkaline gut. Then the insect's digestive enzymes break down the crystal structure and activate BT's insecticidal component, called the delta endotoxin. The delta endotoxin binds to the cells lining the midgut membrane and creates pores in the membrane, upsetting the gut's ion balance. The insect soon stops feeding and starves to death. Man, that's pretty cruel. But it's interesting, right, with all of the information that's increasingly becoming available about how health really starts in the gut. This is where our primary immune system resides, and how all of these health problems are very much related to gut health. Well, it's interesting that this BT pesticide has this impact on the actual insect gut, and then, you know, let's make a logical deductive leap here to what might be going on in human guts as a result of consuming all of these various pesticides, including BT, especially the conventionally grown produce, you know, that a lot of people think are healthy, but when it's saturated in pesticide like this, it's going to leach into our own systems and cause a lot of problems. You know, a lot of people that have Crohn's disease, all sorts of gut problems, you know, it's really increasingly becoming obvious that this is a huge part of the problem with the health of everyone. If the insect is not susceptible to the direct action of the delta endotoxin, death occurs after BT starts vegetative growth inside the insect's gut. The spore germinates after the gut membrane is broken. It then reproduces and makes more spores. The body-wide infection eventually kills the insect. Whew. Health effects testing. Now, this is the very important part. Since BT is a live microbial organism, now they do say it's natural, it just grows in the soil, right? So, of course, this would be certified as acceptable. Testing for the possible hazards of BT is conducted differently from conventional pesticides. Microbial toxicity is described using pathogenicity, the ability of the microbe to cause disease, and infectivity, the ability of the organism to reproduce within the body. The United States EPA requires no testing of BT for carcinogenicity, mutagenicity, or chronic toxicity. So the EPA has done no testing. There's no literature out there officially of any of the negative effects of BT. And yet it's captured 95% of the biopesticide market. I mean, really, for anywhere like they mentioned in this article where you have worm problems or caterpillar problems or beetle problems or anything like that, you know? This is just to say that there's not a lot of research into the effects of BT and all the different strains that are used on farms. And so I went to the Omri approved list. And of course, I found one form of BT. This is Monterey BT. And I didn't do any sort of in depth research into which type of BT this is, but you can see Omri approved for organic gardening. So any USDA certified organic farm could use this BT spray on its farm, and it would be perfectly legal in terms of the USDA certification program. And so you would consume the vegetable or produce that was sprayed with this, and you would not be aware that that had taken place unless you knew what the entire USDA organic certification program entailed. And hopefully now that I just went over that, you are now aware of that. But going further on the Omri approved list, we get into some of the more sketchy problems, right? So this is Nature's Care natural all-purpose water soluble plant food. And this is from Miracle-Gro. Now, this is on the Omri approved list. So theoretically, any USDA certified operation could use this product and be perfectly fine. What's the problem? Well, Scott's Miracle-Gro company is the exclusive agent for Monsanto in the marketing and distribution of consumer Roundup. So do you see the problem here? This program that started in theory and in spirit as a way to protect the integrity of the products produced by true sustainable organic farmers has now reached the point where the Omri approved products that are in compliance with the NOP and the NOSB and the USDA certification program is now including a product from Scott's Miracle-Gro, which is an affiliate of Monsanto. And this underscores the entire problem that I'm describing here, right? And you might say, okay, well, what's the big deal? How can you say that that corporation shouldn't be allowed to produce a quote-unquote organic product? Well, let me explain it to you using a different example. This is Philip Howard's blog, and we'll start with his compilation of the organic industry structure. I highly recommend you take the time. I will link this below, but I highly recommend you take the time to go through this because this is really where the consumer can have an impact. Because this infographic details the steady acquisition of organic brands by the traditional food conglomerates such as Coca-Cola, Hain Celestial, and Campbell's Soup, ConAgra, General Mills, you know, all the Cargill, all of the familiar names, Nestle, White Wave, Pepsi, you know what I'm talking about now, right? But if you check out everything that's in brown here, these are all of the food companies that they have acquired at least certain, a significant equity stake to make it notable in. For example, Snyder's and Diamond Foods purchased an 80% equity stake in late July in 2014. And if you've been in a health food store, you'll see all the late July organic products that are on the shelves. Hain Celestial owns Rudy's Organic Bakery. You'll see those bread products in the frozen section. Maranatha, they have an organic peanut butter that you'll see in health food stores. White Wave Foods, So Delicious, you'll see their coconut products in health food stores. Earthbound Farm, you'll see all sorts of their produce in health food stores. Horizon Organic, their dairy products. I mean, there's a ton of examples, but I just wanted to focus on some of the more well-known ones so you know what I'm talking about. General Mills, Cascadian Farm. I mean, you'll see that stuff in there. Lara bars. on and on it goes, right? And the acquisitions continue on a daily basis. Why is this a problem, you ask? Well, there was a recent study that was just conducted. Arsenic and lead are in your fruit juice. What you need to know. This is from Consumer Reports. And they did a study where they tested fruit juices, and they found arsenic and lead in the fruit juices. For example, they found potential risk, or meaning they found arsenic in R.W. Knudsen organic pear 100% juice. They also found it in R.W. Knudsen organic Just Concord grape juice. Why is that a problem, you ask? Well, let's go back to our infographic. And I can't remember if it's Pepsi or Coke or another one. Let's see if I can find it. But one of these huge corporations, here it is. It's out of the frame. How do I move this? Oh, it's not letting me move it. But you'll just have to trust me that J.M. Smucker Company owns R.W. Knudsen. So you see the problem here. J.M. Smucker is a huge corporation. It's a huge food producer. In this particular case, juices. And so you have this huge company producing this quote-unquote organic juice under the label R.W. Knudsen, and it's contaminated with the same poison that the other products that this company produces and others like it have in them. So you see the problem, right? You see the problem when the organic label is allowed to be used by these huge companies that don't care about product quality. And so you see the analogy that I was giving to this Nature's Care brand by a subsidiary, an affiliate of Monsanto. I mean, I shouldn't say subsidiary. That's not legally accurate, but they are an affiliate and distributor for Monsanto. And yet their products are on the Omri listed products. And so you see the problem here, right? Especially as it relates to all of the packaged foods that are able to increasingly use the USDA organic label. I mean, Earthbound Farm, their produce is everywhere in the health food stores labeled as organic because they're mostly out of California and they produce most of the produce year round. I mean, it's a big problem, right? And you can look at a similar infographic which covers all of the seeds and the conglomeration of the seed industry, and it's the familiar names, Monsanto, BASF, Bayer. So on top of everything else we're talking about, you have this conglomeration of the seed industry and, of course, genetically modified seeds and the pesticides and that whole problem. So in addition to the conventional pesticides that are used in conventional operations, then you have all the conventional seeds. Eventually, if they get their wish, they'll take over the heirloom and quote-unquote organic seed industry as well. And then who knows what will happen to that industry if they're allowed to do that. I mean, there are still independent seed providers that do things the right way, and hopefully it'll stay that way. But then there's the whole problem of the cross-seed contamination, right? You have all those lawsuits that tried to sue Monsanto for destroying regular farms that weren't using the GMO crops, but they got cross-contaminated when they blew in the wind on neighboring farms. And then the seeds are so powerful that they just like terminate the regular seeds, and you can't grow anything other than the genetically modified stuff after that, right? So if they get into the heirloom organic seed industry, they'll destroy the whole thing. I mean, that's probably already taken place to a certain extent. We just don't know it yet. But I'm talking about the more overt, taking over of this process. And man, it's just a crazy thing going on. So moving on, this is understanding the USDA organic label. There are 4 distinct labeling categories for organic products: 100% organic, organic, made with organic ingredients, and specific organic ingredients. In the 100% organic category, products must be made up of 100% certified organic ingredients. The label must include the name of the certifying agent and may include the USDA organic seal and or the 100% organic claim. Now, you very, very rarely see the 100% organic label on anything. The most often thing that you will see is the USDA organic seal, and you'll see here that this means that the product and ingredients must be certified organic except where specified on the national list of allowed and prohibited substances. Non-organic ingredients allowed per the national list may be used, but no more than 5% of the combined total ingredients may contain non-organic content. Additionally, the label must include the name of the certifying agent and may include the USDA organic seal and or the organic claim. So this goes mainly for like the box products that you'll find in health food stores, which have the USDA organic seal. But then when you turn over and look at the ingredients list, you can find ingredients that aren't organic, but it still carries the seal. You know, and this is even, and again, this is the problem I'm speaking of, where, like, for example, I don't know, pickles. You'll see a huge, you know, like Hanes Celestial subsidiary that is a company producing organic pickles. And then you look at the label and it's like less than 2% of, and it'll have like natural flavor, which basically means some variation of MSG or something like that. And all these other calcium chloride and all these other things that are not in the spirit of what an organic product is, but it's actually on the label in the product, but they can still put the USDA organic seal on it. And so these are the majority of the products. So you have to be very diligent when you look at labels, and more importantly, you know, why it's so crucial to really stay up to date on what's going on in the industry and who is acquiring who, is that going back to the arsenic in the juice of R.W. Knudsen, you should not buy any of those products if they are a subsidiary and have been bought out to any extent by any of these huge conglomerates. This is how the consumer can maintain its power, by only buying box products, if you're going to buy something that's in a box, from a company that you have done research into and you know is not doing the practices that these huge corporations are doing. And this is the way that we can exert our power in the industry. And so I want to raise awareness about this. So if you are like me, as I said at the very beginning, and you are buying 100% organic stuff because you're not going to subject yourself knowingly to toxic pesticides or any other sort of toxic synthetic ingredient that they're putting in food now, well, if you're going to pay that premium, you owe it to yourself to make it worth your money and only invest it wisely into companies that have shown over time that they are trustworthy. And okay, so this is more on the substances for organic crop and lifestyle production. These are at the actual lists of the exceptions, and that's what you really want to pay attention to. Because, for example, this is the Electronic Code of Federal Regulations, and this is for synthetic substances allowed for use in organic livestock production. So this is the actual link for livestock here on the USDA organic seal information page. This comes straight from the USDA. And, oh, that's the organic crop production. And you come right down here to synthetic substances allowed for use in organic livestock production, and you see 4 biologics vaccines. So I hope you see what I'm getting at here, where if you are buying quote unquote USDA organic or animal products from a farm that is a subsidiary of a corporation like this, they, if they want to, and most likely have to because they're dealing with diseases from the artificial size and scale of their factory operation, they can, in accordance with the USDA certification program, inject the animals with vaccines. And look what it says here, vaccines. There's no uh, clarifying language on what type of vaccines or anything like that. So you buy this animal product from this huge farm that's producing dairy or eggs or meat on an industrial scale, and unbeknownst to you, while you know that their feed is not containing glyphosate, hopefully, or any other sort of poisons because it's organic feed, well, of course, we don't know if that's technically true, if they're getting their organic produce from some of the huge produce operations that are spraying, pesticides that are technically acceptable within the Omri, NOP, NOSB, USDA program. So that's one problem. But then in addition to that, they can put vaccines into the animals, which is then, transferred through to all of the products that are produced. So this is even more incentive for us all to, and I know it's difficult, but for us all to not be so lazy as to avoid supporting, especially for the animal products, local farms around you that are doing it the right way. Oh, so this is a list. This is going back to what the Cornucopia Institute was talking about with the National Organic Standards Board. And this is kind of just a simple thing that everyone is aware of at this point, or at least everyone should be aware of, where there's the revolving doors between the government and large corporations where they're on the board of the corporation or they work for the corporation at one point in time, and then they're instantly in government, and then they're back in the private sector. It's like, Clarence Thomas, counsel for Monsanto. Oh, he's on the Supreme Court now. So we have Driscoll's Strawberry Associates, huge fruit company. Whole Foods Market, Earthbound Farm. There's Earthbound Farm again. Crop Cooperative, General Mills, Campbell Soup Company, Earthbound Farm again. So you see the familiar names that have in the past been on the NOSB, which is the entity voting on what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in the USDA organic program. And like that Cornucopia Institute article was saying about hydroponics, they just didn't even investigate it further and didn't vote on it at all. And the same thing was done with the report that they provided them on the factory farms and their aerial photography. They just didn't investigate it. And so, these are the people that have connections to these huge corporations that are voting on this and that dictate what will be points of the agenda. So naturally, they have an incentive, although it might not be disclosed to the public, to avoid certain regulations or rules that will negatively impact the huge multinational corporations that are trying to get in on the organic USDA label premium as a business opportunity. Horizon Organic, University of Georgia. Now, again, just because they're associated with the universities doesn't mean anything necessarily. They're probably just scientists. But again, we know, who funds the universities, how they get their grants, and then we know who funds a lot of the studies that employs the scientists. And so then they have an incentive to give the employer or the institutor of the actual study the result that they're looking for. This goes on in the pharmaceutical industries, of course, and naturally it's going to go on in the food industry as well. Minnesota Department of Agriculture, Smuckers. Well, there you go. There you go. We were just going over Smuckers and its company R.W. Knudsen and how its organic juice was contaminated with the same arsenic that was in all of the conventional juices, which of course has been going on for years and years and years in the conventional food system. And there you go. You've got this associate or former worker for Smuckers who's on the NOSB passing regulations about what is considered certified organic. There you go. That explains the whole thing.